Hi St. Peter's. Today's devotional reading is Psalm 66 verses 5 and 6. Come and see what God has done, his awesome deeds for mankind. He turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the waters on foot. Come, let us rejoice in him. So Psalm 66 is one of these wonderfully triumphant psalms that we find. I encourage you to read it all to get a sense of that. But sometimes I don't know about you, but I can kind of sometimes just entirely fail to get caught up in the emotion being conveyed. And if you're anything like me, lockdown has been a swirl of emotions that have not necessarily chimed in with the mood of the psalmist here. For example, he starts, "Shout for joy to God, all the earth. Say to God, how awesome are your deeds." It's a passage littered with exclamation marks. So you'd be forgiven for not initially being up for that challenge, especially if you're thinking of someone who's suffering at the moment, or you'll run off your feet with work or childcare or homeschool. But it's my belief that the verses I read earlier are the key to unlocking this praise. They're not a magic pill that can cure anxiety, depression, or tiredness, but they are the truth that we stand on the promise onto which we hold. Come and see what God has done. Testimony of what God has done is one of the most powerful weapons in our arsenal as Christians. And for Jews, the testimony was so often, as we see in this passage, the Exodus and the parting of the Red Sea and their salvation from Egypt. And we will each have our own stories of what God has done. And those are ones that by which we can come to rejoice in God and worship him. So I encourage you to write them down, write down the big ones, and just try to start remembering the little ones day by day. Keep marking them in your mind. Receive scripture into that testimony as well, the scripture that tells us that by the Spirit, God has brought us into his inheritance by Jesus on the cross. I pray that truth, that story would become yours afresh today, and that by the Spirit you may come into that place of worship again and say, as the psalm does later on, "Let me tell you what he has done for me."